Good morning. It's a beautiful day out in the garden. It's actually a February day. It's a little chilly, but it's that time of year. We're actually been removing all and harvesting all of our broccoli. We got our crowns. We even got a secondary and a tertiary harvest from all the side shoots. It was awesome. But in today's video, we're going to talk about actually transitioning from our fall harvest, which all these plants we planted in fall, we're harvesting them now. Things like our broccoli, our cabbage, carrots are on the way. So those were all planted back in fall, and now we're getting rid of them. Gonna chop these up, feed them to our worms in our compost pile, turn them back into soil. But it's time for us to squeeze in a harvest of potatoes. So here we're in a school garden, and so we have a certain school year, and what I'd like to do is actually, we do a 3 harvest school year. So we'll plant things in fall for a harvest through winter, and that's what we're experiencing right now. And then we try to squeeze in a planting right now, so that way we can have it ready to harvest right before the end of the school year comes, and then we harvest, and then we actually plant our summer crops instantly. And so in today's video, we're gonna be doing a variation of no-till potato planting. Like I said, we've removed this broccoli. We did a light cultivation where we didn't actually dig up the soil. We just broad forked it a little bit just to kind of breathe some air back into it. Now, we normally add compost and soil amendments to our garden twice a year at least. We did it in the fall before we planted what you see here right now. We've added tons of compost, lots of chicken manure, and we always do it again in the spring. And so instead of adding it right this moment to this garden, what we did is we kind of, like I said, we just forked it a little bit, and that just means getting a shovel or a fork into the ground and just kind of breaking it loose a little bit. We didn't flip it over. I didn't cultivate it and turn it in like we sometimes have in the past. We kind of left the soil as is. Most of the work was just getting rid of the plants that were there, pulling out their root system and their stalks so they're not in the way. And what we're doing is we're going to be planting some potatoes. Now, it's really important to find some healthy, disease-free, certified disease-free seed potatoes, and that's what I've got here. I got them from the nursery. We were able to get 4 different varieties. We got some purples, some reds, some whites, some yellow potatoes. They're going to be great. And so we've actually had them indoors in our classroom chitting up. Holy chit! So chitting is just a wonderful word for sprouting. It's when you probably notice this when you purchase some potatoes and you don't eat them or cook them right away, you'll notice them sprouting up. And that just means they're chitted and they're starting to kind of break dormancy and want it to grow. And so it's important that you don't just grab a potato and stick it right in the ground and just hope for the best. Make sure you have really rich, well-drained soil, which we do have here, healthy, disease-free seed potatoes. But what you can do is some people will get these and they'll cut them in half, and actually you can make them into pairs if you want to divide your seed potatoes. Be sure to let that wound heal over and callus over just like you would maybe say if you're propagating a succulent or a cactus where he has a big open wound. Let it callus over a little bit, and you can do that in the same place you're chitting it, just somewhere where it's protected, there's some airflow, it's dry, it's relatively cool. They'll heal up, and then you can split them out. Just make sure you have at least 3 to 4 eyes on each half. And the eyes are basically these little dots where all this growth is coming from. Before the growth comes, you can kind of notice them, and there's these little dots, the eyes of the potato. So make sure if you do cut them in half to kind of get more bang for your buck, right? To kind of stretch that dollar, make sure they heal over properly. Now, in all of my seed potatoes today, we're just gonna do them whole. These are pretty small seed potatoes, all of them kind of tend to be. And so we're just gonna leave them whole and just that way all of them will do well. So that's, for me, that's a little bit greater of a guarantee about the resilience and hardiness of that plant. So you're really gonna get some growth if you kind of just leave it whole, for me. But like I said, if you wanna stretch that dollar, feel free to cut them in half, let them callus over, and that's okay. We did add in a little bit of starter fertilizer to the soil, and that's a mix of bone meal, feather meal, kelp meal, bat guano. There's a bunch of goodies in there, a lot of mycorrhizal fungi, and we've added that all the time through the year. Whenever we do a new planting, it just helps reinvigorate that soil. You want your soil to be alive and full of bacteria, and so by adding organic matter and compost, that's a really great way to do it. But also adding in some other organic fertilizers, like I said, the bone meal, feather meal, blood meal, all the meals. It can be very beneficial to your plants, to your soil, and soil fertility and health. So that's something that we're going to do. Now, like I said, we really didn't add a lot of compost just right now. We did it in the fall. We're going to do it again in the spring. And so what I've done is we cultivated it, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna plant these potatoes. The spacing that we have is our rows are 3 feet apart, and that's just really to give us adequate spacing for our students to kind of navigate without, trampling over our plants. So we have our hills are 3 feet on center, maybe a meter for those of you overseas, give or take. And we're gonna plant these about 10 to 12 inches apart along this hill here. and we're going to put them in little holes with the majority of those sprouts up. Sometimes you'll see the old umbilical cord there, and you can put that down, try to get all your sprouts pointed up if you can. And we're gonna bury this about maybe 2 to 4 inches under the soil. Too deep and it might rot, and it might not have the drainage it needs, and it might not make it to the surface with enough vigor. Too shallow, and you're really not going to have enough space of soil above them for new tubers to grow. So when you plant your first seed potato, you're going to notice that all the new potatoes that do grow as the plant develops, and when you do harvest, will be in a collection above that original. So that's something to keep in mind. So 2 to 4 inches, maybe 5 if you really want to go deep, but really you don't, because what we're going to do is we're going to plant them in these little holes, chits up, and we're eventually, as the season progresses, we're going to be collecting and sifting and harvesting compost from our compost pile, and then we're actually going to be adding that in as a composted mulch to the tops of our plants, and that's going to help act as what we call a top dressing. So we will eventually, I guess, be adding compost to the soil throughout this season, and we'll probably add another bigger batch once these potatoes get harvested, before things like our cucumbers and melons and basil and tomatoes and peppers and things will come into the garden as well. So for us, it's all about enriching the soil, doing all that we can to add and introduce more and more well composted organic matter into the soil, and that's really what's going to give us some strength. So just to give you an example, what I'll do is I actually have a measuring stick that's measured out, and it goes in like 6, 12, 18 inch. I make one, it's like a spare stick I have, and I have it set to a foot. You can see markings on it. And so I'll come and I'll have the students plop these down, and they'll all be, like I said, 10 to 12 inches apart. Then we'll come in and we'll dig a little hole, drop one in. Once they're all in, we can see that, and then we'll just cover them back up, gently pat them down, give them a little water if needed, and then we're off and running, and then you will be growing potatoes. I will definitely have to make a follow-up video to our potato garden as they grow and as they harvest. We're planting, I'll have to count how many potatoes we're gonna plant, but it's probably give or take near 100, maybe a little bit more. And so maybe we'll count how many plants we have growing, and then at the end we'll see how many potatoes we can grow off those plants. Maybe we can weigh them and see how much weight we can get from a certain amount of plants. I'm really looking forward to it. We had a great harvest last year. The kids loved it. It's one of those plants that's very rewarding. You can grow potatoes in containers. If you don't have a big garden with really rich, well-drained soil, there's many different ways to do it. Fabric pots, straw bales. There's a lot of cool ways. So I highly encourage you to investigate all the different opportunities and different strategies that people use for growing potatoes. For us, we live in a somewhat mild climate, or kind of relatively warm. I was just up in the mountains and it was so cold and snowy. I'm like, yeah, it's a little too early for them to plant potatoes. But for us, I made it back down to the valley. It's relatively warm and sunny already. I'm in shorts. I'm celebrating my first shorts day of the year, and it's like February, first week of February, give or take. So very thankful for the weather down here. But you know what? That means we can get things started. We're gonna get a good harvest of these. Now your potatoes are gonna take usually 100 days or more for harvest. Usually it's like 90 to 110, 120, depending upon the variety. Some will mature quicker than others. Actually, the one I have right here is supposedly a little bit early mature. Not like myself, I'm a late bloomer, but so we'll see. It's gonna be exciting. So I highly encourage you to investigate potato growing, because like I said, it's one of those things that's very rewarding. And then when you actually do harvest these, it feels great and it tastes really good. And then you can store them as well and share them. But just growing your own potatoes is pretty fun. It's a fun garden activity. So I cannot wait. We will get back to you on that. Wishing you all the best in your own gardens. So happy gardening to you all. Please never stop growing, and we'll see you next time out in the garden. Get out there and get growing, folks.